Lory Dance, you're a visiting senior researcher at Lund University and an associate professor of sociology and ethnic studies at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. You received your PhD in sociology from Harvard University. I know from previous conversations that you come from a working class to working poor background. Did class, ethnicity, or gender affect your graduate student experiences at Harvard?
Okay, where do I start? Yes. First, yes, I come from a working class to working poor community in the southern part of Virginia, in a city called Petersburg, Virginia, a community called Blanford, which is 100% African American. So the gender, the class, and the ethnicity, or as we say in the US, race, unfortunately, were things that I ran into more at Georgetown than at Harvard. But I think what happened at Georgetown was I was chosen for this program. Georgetown University is a fairly elitist private institution, but because I was pretty successful in my high school, I was chosen for a program at Georgetown, which then provided me with the social and cultural capital that I needed to be successful, because most Georgetown University students go to really, really well-funded public schools or private schools. But it was there where I ran into gender, class-based, as well as ethnicity or race-based types of exclusions. When I got to Harvard, however, I had been fortified, because now I had the social and cultural capital to know how to deal with those types of things. But still, yes, at Harvard, exclusions existed. There is an assumption that was made when I was at Harvard, which is fairly safe to make, and that is that the vast majority of Harvard students come from well-to-do backgrounds. To improve that, meaning to make Harvard more of a meritocracy, that's the improvement, Harvard now has this policy for those whose parents' income, so students with family incomes of $65,000 or less can go to Harvard tuition-free. And if those with family incomes, students who have parents with family incomes of $65,000 to $150,000 may have to pay 0 to 10% of their family income. So Harvard has just been made more financially available. But I think as Harvard strives to be successful with being this meritocracy, it will have to really deal with elitism. Because when I was at Harvard, I ran into elitism all the time, which got worse in terms of, and it wasn't mean-spirited. It was just the references that students would make. Words like ghetto, words like maybe welfare mom. I mean, students would throw these words around with impunity. Now, I'm neither from a ghetto nor a welfare mom, but I'm very sensitive to those class-based expressions. So for someone coming to Harvard, if you're an undergrad, if I hadn't had my Georgetown experience by the time I got to graduate school, I don't know that I would have navigated those intersections of dehumanizing people who have both class and ethnicity-based social identities. And so I'm working on a book because this really concerns me, because I had that experience at Harvard that I weathered because I had learned how to do so as an undergrad. So I weathered my graduate student experience for that reason. I wonder, how much does Harvard pay attention to the voices right there that can teach Harvard about its elitism? Because it's one thing to give students the financial means to come to Harvard, but if a student is sitting there with classmates talking about yachts and classmates talking about spending summers in France, that can be quite exclusionary, not to mention the more harsher ways in which classmates talk down. So I think that there are 4 spaces to look. There's the more historical look at Harvard, starting in the late 1800s. I don't want to go back any further. Harvard's founded in 1636. But in the late 1800s, Harvard itself claims that it wants to be more accessible. W.E.B. Du Bois would be a figure to pay attention to, because he's the first African American to get a PhD from Harvard, and he gets his PhD in the Department of Sociology. So what is he saying? What's his experience? How much is he showing up in the archival record? However, if he doesn't show up in the archival record, he goes on to write a lot about race-based exclusion. And then contemporarily, there's a professor at Harvard. Her name is Sarah Lawrence Lightfoot. She's the first woman to get tenure at Harvard University. She's about to retire, but I want to talk to her. What can she teach us about Harvard's exclusions from the perspective of someone who is black and female? What has she to say? What can Harvard learn from her? And then there are 3 other sources of information, I believe. And these I learned when I was doing my dissertation work at Harvard. I had conversations with students, high school kids, who come from the bottom 20th percent. So we're talking about people making $25,000 a year or less in family income. And they can tell you their stories are about Harvard or about high levels of elitism, stories told to them by their parents and their grandparents, so they have no desire to go to Harvard. So that's another source. And then the other 2 sources right now would be Harvard's Phillips Brooks House, which is Harvard's outreach. They outreach to low-income communities in Boston and Cambridge. Harvard is in Cambridge, Massachusetts, which borders Boston. So what stories do they tell about Harvard's elitism? The students who work at the Phillips Brooks House. And then last but not least, I want to interview members of the Harvard Union of Technical and Clerical Workers, Harvard's union. They have stories to tell workers right there at Harvard, the staff, about Harvard's elitism. And I think if Harvard could understand from those persons best qualified to talk about experiencing elitism at Harvard, then maybe Harvard figures out a way to not only make Harvard financially accessible to students from low-income backgrounds, but to give them a sense of entitlement and belonging, because they'll find a way to reduce the elitist commentary and discourses.
Thank you, Lory Dance.
Thank you.